Good day, guys. My name is Daniel Malik, and today I have another very special guest for you. It's Mads Kristensen. Welcome, Mads.
Thank you very much.
So, it's a bit of a coincidence, but you're a second Danish guy I'm doing an interview with. So, today I wanted to talk with you about Web Essentials and Visual Studio extensions. So, Visual Studio 2015 has just been announced, and I'm wondering, when can we expect Web Essentials for that?
Well, it's out right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the plan is that it will be released on the Visual Studio Gallery for free download as soon as I get to it, just after the initial release of 2015. So if you're watching this, it should already be out there, including the source code. Everything should be free and available for everyone.
That is amazing. Yeah. And Visual Studio 2013 Update 4 is bringing another version of Visual Studio, which will be community, and I believe Web Essentials will work with that too, right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's this new version of Visual Studio that is, it's not an express version like the free ones we have today, but it's closer to what Pro is, and all the extensions that today work on Visual Studio Professional also works on this new version of Visual Studio. And what's really cool about that is that in the past, or before we had this new version of Visual Studio, the free one, no one could actually write an extension for the Express versions. But now, since we have this new Professional Community Edition, all the extensions that you use and love on the Pro or Premium and Ultimate will work on the free version. So that's really, really cool.
You hear that, guys? Go and grab it while it's hot. So, Mads, let's start talking about Web Essentials. What is new?
A lot of things. So a lot of things have changed with Web Essentials in this version.
Okay.
So in the past, or at least with Visual Studio 2013, or Web Essentials 2013, it shipped with Node, and it did a lot of stuff on Node for doing CoffeeScript-less Sass compilation, auto prefixing, JS hint, JS CS, all sorts of things actually ran on Node. Node.exe or Node.js, and that is all gone now in Visual Studio for 2015, because Visual Studio now have the capability of running grunt and gulp tasks. So these are task runners. Think about MS Build maybe, but for client-side tasks such as compiling CoffeeScript and less and Sass. And so because we now have this feature in Visual Studio, I wanted to remove it from Web Essentials because of there were a few reasons for that. Okay. So one is that it's one of the areas that I've had most problems with.
Oh, really?
Yes, because we're spinning up different processes to running Node. We actually run a Node server to make the compilation faster and all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of complexities, and as a result, Visual Studio had sometimes crash or it will hang sometimes, and that's a result of all these moving pieces. So. Think of Visual Studio Web Essentials for Visual Studio 2015 as being back to the basics. This is about extending the editor experience, the workflows, all those sort of things, but letting Visual Studio itself, in combination with Grunt and Gulp, handle those more complex client-side front-end scenarios, because they're going to be fully supported by Visual Studio. So there really is no reason for Web Essentials to carry that going forward. And so I think that's going to be really good for a number of reasons. One is the code base is going to be much smaller. Yeah. So instead of having a 17 megabyte download, it's going to be around 2 megabytes. So that's a good thing.
Wow, the size reduced significantly.
Yeah. It's all the Node modules. It takes up a lot of space. It really does. And also, you're going to have a much more stable system. So if you install Web Essentials, it will be much more stable than it have been before because of this. And so that's really good. But if we want to write extensions or contribute or send pull requests to Web Essentials, the code base is now much easier to understand because there's just much less of it, right? So all that stuff is going to be much easier going forward. And I think that for the community around Web Essentials, that's going to be a really good thing. Yeah.
When you mentioned that people can contribute to Web Essentials, as a developer, I found it quite difficult. When I had to go through the documentation, how to write Visual Studio extensions. You have built so many extensions so far, and I wonder how you started, how difficult it was for you.
I think there are some concepts of Visual Studio extensibility that you have to learn, and you can only learn it the hard way. And you have to look at a lot of sample code and read some documentation, read blog posts. There is not really one central place to get all that information, so you have to get over the initial sort of steep climb. It is sort of a steep climb in understanding those basic constructs. But as long as you understand it, when you get to that point, it's actually pretty easy to move on from there. And it also becomes easy because then you know exactly what to search for, what interfaces to search for online to find the example source code and so on. And then from that point on, everything is pretty easy. And the good thing about Web Essentials is that it pretty much touches all extensibility points in Visual Studio, and it's all open source. So no matter what you want to do, if you want to write your own extension, chances are that the interfaces you need, the example code will be in Web Essentials. And Web Essentials is licensed with Apache 2, so copy paste, go for it.
That's good.
Yeah.
So extending Web Essentials is probably fairly easy, huh?
Yeah, I would say so, because all the plumbing is already there. So if you want to build a feature, and it could be a small feature, like you want to enhance some IntelliSense in CSS or with Race or HTML or whatever it might be, chances are that all the plumbing is already there, and you only have to add the logic that does exactly what you need. And so Web Essentials might be a really good opportunity to get your feature out there for yourself, of course, so you can use it. But then, why not let everyone else use it? And so Web Essentials is good that way. And sometimes also you have an idea for an extension which could just be a simple little thing, and you might not think that that's not worth learning the entire extensibility model in Visual Studio just to do that. And if you do that and you release it on the Visual Studio Gallery, that's where we have all the extensions. It might be such a small extension that maybe not that many people will download it. And so again, Web Essentials is really good there because you know that hundreds of thousands of people are going to download it and install it. So I would recommend, if you're new to extensions, start helping out with Web Essentials, submit pull requests, add features, get familiarize yourself with the extensibility model, and then you're going to find it to be much easier to build your own extension later on.
So now I have a challenge for you. Can we build an extension or a simple feature in Web Essentials in the next 10 minutes? Is that possible?
Yes.
Let's start coding.
All right. So,
what we're gonna build?
Well, to be fair, right, to the viewers,
okay,
we did prepare this a little bit, right? So I already figured out a good place to show where we can do a quick little demo. So I want to show sort of a problem that I find today that I want to fix. So let's just move into the code here.
Okay, let's see it.
So here is an HTML file. This is just Visual Studio, and there's a limitation in how the HTML editor in Visual Studio operates when it comes to IntelliSense. Let me give you an example. So let me add a meta tag and say name equals Twitter card. What Web Essentials will give us here is that in the content attribute, it will actually list me the correct values that are available for the Twitter card.
Okay.
Right? So that's really nice. Now the limitation in the editor in the Visual Studio goes in that it cannot give you IntelliSense in one attribute value based on the value of another attribute. Right? So this IntelliSense you see right here comes from Web Essentials. Visual Studio does not have a native mechanism to do this. So the way IntelliSense works for HTML and for CSS for that matter is that it's defined in XML schemas that are that Visual Studio reads from, and there is no construct of sort of dynamic IntelliSense. That doesn't exist, but we can do that through extensibility, and that's what I'm doing right here. So the problem is what I ran into, and I've run into this quite many times actually, and I've never fixed it, which is kind of stupid, but it's a meta tag for fragment. So fragment, so if you write single page applications and you want them to be indexable by, let's say, Google and Bing, we use this meta tag called fragment to instruct the search engine on how to crawl the site, okay? So I won't go into the specifics of how to set all that sort of up for single page applications, but what we want to do is that we want to have a meta name fragment with the content of an exclamation mark like this.
Right.
But as you noticed when I was typing here, I do not get any IntelliSense in here.
So control space doesn't work.
Control space simply does absolutely nothing.
Okay.
And that's just silly. So this is a small example, but it's really good because it shows you how easy this really is. And so you can imagine that you can come up with like more complex scenarios than just a simple exclamation mark, like one item, right?
So I assume you're going to add IntelliSense support for the content based on the name of fragment, right?
Yes.
That's perfect.
Let's look at the source code here first. This is Web Essentials. So let's just zoom in here so we can see what's going on.
The code base is quite big, isn't it? Can you just give me a bit of an overview of what do you have here?
Yeah. So the way the folder structure inside Web Essentials is structured is that it has like a sort of a top-level folder per content type or file extension or whatever you want to call it. So we have one for CSS, HTML, JavaScript, JSON, and so on. So that's sort of how it's structured. So if you want to do something with HTML, just go and find the HTML folder, which is right here. Okay. And when we open it, we're going to see the same folders that we will see anywhere else. Now, not all these top-level folders have the same subfolders. So if I go to Ice CoffeeScript, which is a flavor of CoffeeScript, you can see that we only have one thing in here. Whereas if I open CSS, you'll see CSS has a lot of stuff, and a lot of it is exactly the same as we have down in HTML. So things are named the same no matter what content type they target, which makes it sort of easy to navigate.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. So, because you're right, there's a lot of code here. And we want to play around with IntelliSense. So IntelliSense, when we're dealing with Visual Studio extensibility, is called completion.
Yeah.
Right? So completion is the same as IntelliSense. So we have a folder called completion. And if we take a look at the Twitter card completion, this is the one I just demoed, right?
Okay, yeah.
We can see that it's actually very, very simple. It's literally 20 lines of code here. And the way Visual Studio works is that it uses MEF, so the Microsoft Extensibility Framework. So that means
that serves as an IOC, right?
Yes, that's the way we can load our features into Visual Studio without actually doing any other bootstrapping work. We just decorate it with some attributes. And here we're going to decorate it with an HTML completion provider. And that's enough for Visual Studio to pick up on, find any class with this attribute and then run it in the right context.
Okay,
So what I'm going to tell Visual Studio about this is that it should work, it should apply this IntelliSense. It should apply on values, and that means attribute values. I can also do it for attribute names and for element names and all sorts of other things. There are a lot to choose from in here, right? But this is for values, as in attribute values.
Okay.
I wanted to apply to the meta tag. Let's just bring up the IntelliSense here so we can see. The element name meta, right? So the meta element. And on the content attribute, that's the attribute name.
Yeah.
So now I've registered, so now this will run whenever I invoke IntelliSense inside the content attribute of the meta tag. Then, because in Web Essentials, we've already abstracted a lot of things to make it super, super simple for you to contribute. So we've already done a little bit of work here. So we can say there's a key property, because we want to make this specific to when the meta name equals fragment, and only when it equals fragment. So the entire IntelliSense of the content attribute is based on the value of the name attribute. Okay, so we say in the name attribute, when it equals to Twitter card, add all these values to IntelliSense. This is very, very simple stuff, right?
So that's what we have seen before.
Yeah. So let's just copy and paste basically. So let's call this one. So I just copied this and let's call it fragment.
Yep, that's fine.
Fragment completion. So this is easy. So we're just gonna do this like this. Rename some things, and again we still want the meta tag, but in this case we want fragment, and we want the values to show up. We can add any value we want, of course, but I just actually want the exclamation mark here, right?
Oh,
so,
nice.
So that's the only one. So there's only going to be one value here, but you can see.
We'll let people to do the others.
They can do the others, right? So I'm done. This is it, right?
Wow.
And I can just build Control Shift B and.
So fast.
Yeah, exactly.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, this is. It doesn't have to be that difficult, you know. So now it's running. So how can we test what we've just done? Now, if you write Visual Studio extensions, the way that you run is the exact same way as if you build a C# app, a console app, a website. You hit F5 or Control F5.
Yep.
In this case, I'm just going to hit Control F5. I do not want to debug, but debugging actually works the exact same way. Hit F5 and set breakpoints. Now let's see what happens when I hit Control F5. It launches a new instance of Visual Studio.
Yeah.
And it has already loaded my extension into that new instance of Visual Studio. So now if we open an HTML file here, we got one here, we should be able to see our IntelliSense.
Okay, let's see it working.
So I made a name fragment, content, and let's zoom in. We now have it in IntelliSense.
You gotta be kidding me.
It is easy, right? It doesn't have to be difficult. But the cool thing here is that this is great if you would just want to contribute to Web Essentials. This is how easy it is, right? If you want to go a little bit deeper and write your own extension, feel free to see how, just go down in the source code, see how this was implemented, find the base classes that made this so easy in Web Essentials, and just copy it over and use it on your own, like in your own extension. That's perfectly fine. This is meant as, we have to remember, Web Essentials is open source for two reasons. One is to provide a better web development experience with Visual Studio, right, for web developers, right? That's goal number one. The other goal is to teach people and encourage people to build extensions to make Visual Studio better for all of us. So, feel very free to look at the code, take it, and build your own extension on top of it, right? That's part of it.
Now the final thing, we have to publish this to GitHub, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, because this is actually a feature I really want. Let's see here. Does it look good to you? Yeah, this looks pretty good. All right, so GitHub, and it shows up. All right, so I added a new file, and the CS project also has a modification here. So a good practice that we use in Web Essentials, and again, this is everyone that contributes to Web Essentials is encouraged to follow this pattern. So let me just zoom in here. So your commit message should start with the feature area that you've been working on. So in this case, it's HTML. So HTML : and then we can add added fragment completion. All right. Yep. Commit, and then we sync it, and now it's on GitHub. So that was it.
That is amazing. So guys, this feature is coming in Web Essentials for Visual Studio 2015. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.